The day I returned from my trip, the safe was empty and my assets were gone. My younger brother, the one I had once taken in, had betrayed me and fled with his lover. I was stunned, and my parents told me not to make a big deal out of it. But little did I know it was my 13-year-old son who had quietly taken a step ahead, and his actions sent shivers down our entire family's spine. My name is Maverick Brooks, 37 years old, a man you might call stable in the eyes of others. I have a small family, a tidy house in the suburbs, a financial management job in the city center, and a life that many would look at and say, he's got it all. But if you asked me, I'd say my life is like a carefully organized notebook, every page neatly in place. My job at the financial firm isn't anything glamorous, but I take pride in it. I manage a team of risk analysts, a role that demands discipline, caution, and the ability to foresee dangers others might miss. My colleagues respect me, my boss trusts me, and I always try to bring that stability home. Nicole, my wife, calls me the rock of the family. Not because I'm cold, but because I'm always there, steady, no matter what happens. But even rocks can crack, can't they? And indeed, that rock began to show cracks. Unfortunately, the one causing those cracks was Wyatt, my younger brother. Wyatt is 9 years younger than me. He's an entirely different story. If I'm a neatly arranged notebook, Wyatt is a pile of crumpled paper covered in haphazard scribbles with no beginning or end. At 28, he was once a promising programmer in the tech industry, but now, Wyatt is just an unemployed man, fired for fraud and irresponsibility. I don't know the details because Wyatt never shares anything specific. He just called me one afternoon, his voice tinged with a hint of embarrassment, but still carrying that, "It's no big deal, bro," confidence. He said he'd lost his job, his house, and asked if he could stay at my place just for a few weeks to find a new job. I wanted to say no, I really did. But then I remembered my mother's eyes, my father's voice, and the lessons from childhood that I, as the older brother, had to look after him. So I reluctantly agreed, my heart heavy. Wyatt arrived at my house on a drizzly evening. He dragged along an old suitcase, his brown hair a tangled mess, and that familiar half-smile, the one that used to melt our mother's heart whenever Wyatt did something wrong. "Thanks, Maverick," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as if we were still two kids playing in our parents' backyard. But I'm no longer the 15-year-old Maverick, and Wyatt isn't the 6-year-old kid hiding behind me when he got scolded. Now he's an adult, but he still seems to live with the mindset that everything will be forgiven as long as he flashes that smile. Nicole, my wife, wasn't happy about Wyatt's arrival. She didn't say it outright, but I could tell from the way her lips tightened when Wyatt dragged his suitcase through the living room, knocking over a glass of water on the table without apologizing. "Just a few weeks, honey," I whispered to her that night as we lay in bed, moonlight streaming through the curtains. Nicole sighed, her hand gently squeezing mine. "I just want our family to stay peaceful, Maverick. Luke needs his space, and I don't want him disrupted." I nodded, promising her I'd keep Wyatt in check. But deep down, I knew it was a promise I might struggle to keep. Luke, my son, is a special boy. At 13, he's quiet. Not the shy kind of quiet, but the kind that observes everything as if solving a complex puzzle no one else can see. Luke doesn't talk much, but when he does, he always surprises me with his sharpness. I remember once, while I was reviewing financial reports at home, Luke glanced over my shoulder and pointed out a small error in a calculation I'd missed. "Dad, this number doesn't add up," he said, his voice calm as if it were obvious. I just laughed and ruffled his hair. When Wyatt arrived, Luke didn't react much. He nodded a greeting to his uncle and quietly returned to his room with his laptop. But I noticed the way he looked at Wyatt, not with a child's curiosity, but with a wariness, as if he were sizing up a stranger. I thought I was overthinking it, that Luke was just being a sensitive teenager. Wyatt quickly turned our home into a mess. He left dirty dishes in the sink, clothes strewn across the sofa, and even smoked in the kitchen despite knowing Nicole hated the smell of cigarettes. I tried talking to him gently but firmly. "Wyatt, this is my house. You need to respect the rules a bit. He just laughed, nodded, and said, "Relax, bro. I'll clean up right away." But Wyatt's right away stretched into a week and nothing changed. Things got worse when Wyatt brought his girlfriend Abby to live with us. Abby was a young woman with dyed green hair, always chewing gum and talking in a teasing tone. She showed up unannounced one day, dragging a huge duffel bag and smiling as if she were an honored guest. "Maverick, Nicole, thank you so much for letting me stay," Abby said. But I could see Nicole clenching her hands under the dining table, trying to stay calm. I wanted to refuse, to say my house wasn't a hostel, but Wyatt was quick. "Just a few days, bro. Abby's in a tough spot and I can't abandon her." And so once again I swallowed my anger and agreed. They took over Luke's room. He didn't complain, quietly moving his things to our room with his pillow and precious laptop. Nicole exploded that night. "Maverick, you're letting them go too far. Luke needs his space. Don't you see that?" I knew she was right, but I didn't know what to do. Wyatt was my brother, and no matter how he was, I felt a responsibility to help. Maybe it was the legacy of our childhood when my parents always told me, "Maverick, you're the older brother. You have to take care of Wyatt." My childhood with Wyatt was a long story of contrasts. I was the serious kid, always doing homework on time, always obeying our parents. Wyatt was the opposite, mischievous, messy, but always able to make everyone laugh. My mother used to say, "Wyatt is truly the family's gift." But that gift came with a price I had to pay. When Wyatt broke my mother's favorite vase, I was the one scolded for not watching him carefully. When Wyatt skipped school, I was the one apologizing to the teachers. I grew up as the responsible older brother, carrying all the burdens while Wyatt just had to smile to be forgiven. Once, when I was 17, I angrily told my dad, "Why do I have to be responsible for all of Wyatt's mistakes?" He just looked at me, sighed, and said, "Because you're the older brother. You have to be stronger." Now, watching Wyatt sprawl on the sofa, phone in hand, laughing with Abby while our home descended into chaos, I felt that old anger rising again. But I held it back, as I always had. I reminded myself that in a few weeks Wyatt would find a job, leave, and everything would return to normal. Nicole started avoiding Wyatt and Abby, only speaking to them when necessary. She spent more time with Luke, trying to make up for the disruption in his life. But Luke remained quiet, his brown eyes always seeming to look far away, as if searching for something I couldn't see. I tried talking to him, asking if he was okay, but Luke just gave a faint smile and said, "I'm fine, Dad." Every night lying next to Nicole, I felt my heart grow heavy. I wanted to protect my family, to keep everything stable, but Wyatt was like a storm, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep this ship steady. One night I heard a strange noise from the living room in the middle of the night. I went out and saw Wyatt sitting at the computer, the screen's light illuminating his face. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Wyatt flinched, quickly closing the laptop. "Just browsing the web, bro," he said with that familiar smile. I nodded, but the unease in my heart grew stronger. I didn't know that within my own home a secret was forming, and the one holding that secret wasn't me, nor Nicole, but Luke, the 13-year-old boy with cold, sharp eyes and a plan I never could have imagined. The tension in the house grew thicker, like a dark cloud hovering overhead. Nicole became quieter, her eyes often sweeping over Wyatt and Abby with undisguised irritation. She stopped trying to keep the peace, no longer inviting them to join us for family dinners. Instead, she spent her time with Luke, helping him with his homework or watching the sci-fi movies he loved. One evening, as I was checking work emails in the bedroom, Nicole walked in and closed the door with a soft but resolute click. She sat down beside me, her hands clasped tightly together, and said, "Maverick, I can't take it anymore. We need space, time to breathe. I want us to go somewhere for a few days, just the three of us." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with exhaustion. I looked into her eyes and saw the weariness of a woman who had been trying to hold everything together, and I knew she was right. This house was no longer a sanctuary, it was becoming a battlefield. "Okay," I said, placing my hand on hers. "We'll go. A short trip, just a few days. It might be good for all of us, especially Luke." Nicole nodded, but her eyes were still filled with worry. "What about Wyatt and Abby?" she asked, her voice lowering as if afraid someone might overhear. I sighed, feeling a weight press down on my chest again. "I'll tell Wyatt to watch the house. They'll be fine." The next morning, I called Wyatt into the living room. He plopped down on the sofa, one leg slung over the coffee table, his hands still fiddling with his phone. Abby was in the other room, pop music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker, making me frown. "Wyatt," I began, keeping my voice calm. "We're planning to go on a trip for a few days. I need you to stay and look after the house. Can you handle that?" Wyatt looked up, that familiar smile spreading across his face. "Of course, bro. I'll keep everything in order. You guys just go and enjoy." There was something about the way he said it, too quick, too eager, that made a flicker of doubt cross my mind. I told him to lock the doors carefully, check the security cameras, and not do anything foolish. Wyatt nodded enthusiastically, but his eyes darted away as if hiding something. Preparations for the trip happened quickly. Nicole picked a coastal resort a few hours' drive from home, a place with gentle waves and trails winding through pine forests. "Luke will love it," she said, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. I smiled, trying to let her excitement rub off on me, but there was a strange emptiness inside, as if I were leaving something important behind. Luke, as usual, didn't say much about the trip. He just nodded when I asked if he wanted to bring the drone I'd given him for his birthday. "Sure, Dad," he said in his even tone, then went back to his laptop. I wanted to ask what he was doing, but instead I just ruffled his hair and walked away. The day we left, the sky was clear, the sun a brilliant gold. I drove, Nicole sat beside me, and Luke was in the back, earbuds in, eyes glued to his phone screen. Wyatt and Abby stood at the front door, waving as if seeing off a departing train. "Have fun, you guys," Wyatt called out, his grin so wide I almost believed he genuinely wished us well. I glanced at Nicole and saw her staring out the window, her hand gripping the seatbelt tightly. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded but didn't look at me. "I just hope this trip brings us closer together," she whispered. The resort was picturesque. Wooden cabins were scattered among pine trees, the salty sea air mingling with the scent of resin. Nicole relaxed immediately, pulling Luke along for a walk on the beach, laughing loudly as he tried to jump over the waves. I stood at a distance watching them, trying to let this moment erase the tension in my heart. But I couldn't. Something felt off, like a discordant note in a symphony. That first evening, we had dinner outdoors under twinkling lanterns. Nicole shared a story about her first time at the beach as a child, when a wave swept away her sandals. Luke listened, occasionally smiling, but his eyes remained distant. I tried to draw him into the conversation. "What do you think of this place, Luke? Want to try surfing tomorrow?" He looked at me, thought for a moment, and said, "It's okay, Dad, but I'd rather walk in the forest." His voice was soft, but something about it made me feel he wasn't truly excited. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I asked, lowering my voice so Nicole wouldn't hear. Luke met my gaze, a strange glint in his brown eyes, then shook his head. "Nothing, Dad. Everything's fine." But those words, instead of reassuring me, only made me more uneasy. That night, lying on the wooden bed in the cabin, I couldn't sleep. Nicole was curled up beside me, her breathing steady, while Luke slept on a fold-out bed in the corner, his laptop tucked beside his pillow. I looked at him, at the way he clutched his pillow as if guarding a secret. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. I picked up my phone and texted Wyatt. "Is the house okay? Are the security cameras working?" The message went through, and just a few minutes later, Wyatt replied, "All good. No need to worry." I stared at the text, trying to convince myself he was keeping his promise. On the second day, I tried to immerse myself in the atmosphere. I went for a walk with Luke on a forest trail where sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting patterns of light and shadow on the ground. He walked beside me, silent, hands in his pockets. "Do you like this place?" I asked, trying to break the quiet. Luke nodded but said nothing. I stopped and put a hand on his shoulder. "Luke, I know things at home haven't been easy lately. If you want to talk about anything, you can tell me, okay?" He looked up, his gaze so sharp it startled me. "I know, Dad, but not everything needs to be said, right?" I stared at him, unsure how to respond. On the third day, as we packed to head home, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I wanted to get back to check if everything was truly okay, as Wyatt claimed. But deep down, I knew this trip wasn't an escape. It was merely the prelude to a bigger storm, and I, like a blind sailor, was heading into its heart without even realizing it. The drive home felt longer than I expected. With every passing mile, the unease inside me grew, like an invisible cord tightening around my chest. Nicole sat beside me, silent, her hands clasped tightly together. The smile she had at the beach was gone, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as if she too sensed something was wrong. Luke, as usual, sat in the back, earbuds in, his gaze glued to his phone screen. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, hoping for some sign. A smile, a shrug, anything to ease the heavy feeling weighing me down. But Luke just sat there, his face calm, his brown eyes gleaming with a strange focus. As we turned onto the road leading to our house, dusk was settling in. The house came into view under the streetlights, familiar yet inexplicably foreign. The front door was slightly ajar, something I'd never seen since we installed the security system. "Did Wyatt forget to lock the door?" I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady to avoid worrying Nicole. But my heart was already pounding faster. I stopped the car, stepped out, and the anxiety within me surged like a tidal wave. Stepping inside, I froze. The living room was a wreck. Sofa cushions were askew, a broken coffee mug lay shattered on the floor, and papers from my desk were scattered everywhere. Nicole followed behind me, gasping sharply. "Maverick, what is this?" Her voice trembled. I didn't answer right away, too busy processing the scene before me. I rushed to the corner of the room where we kept the safe, a small one hidden behind a family portrait. My hands shook as I pulled the painting aside. The safe's lock was intact, but when I entered the code, the door swung open, and inside, it was empty. Not a single coin, not a piece of paper, not even my grandmother's old wedding ring, which I kept as a cherished heirloom. Nicole screamed, her hand covering her mouth. "Maverick! The money. Where's all the money?" She rushed to my side, her eyes wide, her face pale. I stood there, stunned, feeling as if the floor beneath me was collapsing. "A burglary," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It has to be a burglary." But even as I said it, I knew something wasn't right. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. The windows were intact, and the security cameras, ones I'd checked before we left, were still blinking green. If this was a burglary, it was too perfect, too clean. Nicole darted to the desk, opening the laptop and muttering, "Check the bank accounts, Maverick." Maybe they hacked into the system. I nodded, my hands trembling as I typed in the password. When the screen lit up, I logged into our family bank account, praying this was just a nightmare. The balance appeared, and I let out a sigh of relief. The account was untouched, not a cent missing. "The money in the bank is still there," I said, my voice breaking with a mix of relief and confusion. But that small comfort quickly faded as I thought of the cash and jewelry in the safe, our years of savings and priceless family heirlooms. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. "This can't be," I mumbled, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Nicole stood behind me, her hands gripping my shoulders, her voice choked with sobs. "How could this happen? Where's Wyatt?" My brother's name rang out like an accusation, and I felt the blood rush to my head. I grabbed my phone and called Wyatt, but it only rang endlessly before going to voicemail. "Wyatt, call me back now." I nearly shouted into the phone, but deep down I knew he wouldn't respond. In the midst of our panic, I noticed Luke still standing in the corner of the room, silent, not saying a word. He wasn't running around like his mother, wasn't shouting or asking questions. Instead, he held his laptop, walked to the dining table, and opened it with a calmness that sent a chill down my spine. "Luke, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice strained with stress. He didn't answer right away, just typed something on the keyboard, his brown eyes focused as if solving a complex puzzle. "Mom, Dad, sit down," he said, his voice steady but carrying a strange authority, as if he were in control of the entire room. Nicole and I exchanged a glance, then reluctantly sat down. Luke turned the laptop screen toward us. "You need to see this," he said, and pressed play. A video began, the footage grainy, showing the living room from an angle I didn't recognize. Not the angle of our security cameras. It was as if it had been recorded by a different device. In the video, Wyatt and Abby appeared, moving quickly through the living room. Wyatt opened the painting covering the safe, entered the code, a code I had never shared with him, and began taking the money, stuffing it into a canvas bag. Abby stood nearby, her voice a hushed whisper. "Hurry up, Wyatt, before they get back." My heart stopped. I looked at Nicole, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the chair so tightly her knuckles were white. "Luke, how did you get this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away, instead switching to another file on the laptop. This time, it was a screen recording showing Wyatt's actions on a computer. I recognized the interface of my online banking and Wyatt's attempts to enter the password, failing each time, the screen flashing an error message. "I changed the password before we left," Luke said, his voice still calm. "I knew he'd try, but I didn't let him get the money in the bank." Before I could process what was happening, Luke opened an audio file. Wyatt's voice came through clear as day, mixed with Abby's laughter. "When they go on their trip, we'll have our chance. Take the money, then get out of here. My brother loves me too much, he won't call the police." Abby giggled. "You're a genius." The recording ended, and the room fell silent. I felt as if someone had stabbed me in the chest, not because of the stolen money, but because of the betrayal. Wyatt, my little brother, the one I'd protected since childhood, had planned to rob me of everything I'd built. Nicole broke down, covering her face and sobbing, but I couldn't move. I just stared at Luke, my 13-year-old son, who had just unveiled a brutal truth with the composure of a seasoned investigator. "Luke," I whispered, my voice faltering, "why didn't you tell me?" He looked at me, his gaze sharp but not devoid of emotion. "I wanted to be sure, Dad," he said. "I wanted proof, and I got it." I sat there, my mind spinning, my heart heavy. I wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to chase after Wyatt and demand back what belonged to my family. But above all, I was stunned by Luke, the boy I thought I knew so well but now realized I knew nothing about. He had silently observed, gathered evidence, and prepared for this moment while Nicole and I were consumed by our own emotional storm. In Luke's eyes, I saw a terrifying maturity, a resolve I never could have imagined in a 13-year-old. "Mom, Dad," Luke said, closing the laptop, "we need to call the police." His voice didn't waver, didn't hesitate, as if he had calculated everything long ago. And in that moment I realized the storm I feared wasn't just from Wyatt. It was also from my own son, a silent, sharp, and unstoppable storm. I sat there, my mind spinning, my heart heavy as if crushed by a boulder. Nicole was still crying, her hands clutching her face, but her eyes darted toward Luke, a mix of gratitude and unease. I wanted to say something, to ask the 100 questions surging in my mind, but my throat was dry as if every word was trapped. "Luke," I finally managed, my voice hoarse, "how did you know all this? Why didn't you tell us?" He looked at me, his sharp brown eyes not devoid of emotion. There was a strange glint in them, as if he were weighing how much to reveal. "I wasn't sure at first, Dad," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that sent a chill through me. "But I saw the signs, and I couldn't let things go too far." Nicole wiped her tears, sitting up straight, looking at Luke as if he were a stranger. "What signs, honey?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? What did Wyatt do to make you suspicious enough to do all this?" She gestured toward the laptop, which held undeniable evidence of Wyatt's betrayal. Luke sighed, a sigh not like that of a 13-year-old, but of someone who had seen too much. He sat down, placed the laptop on the table, and began to speak, his voice calm but clear, as if delivering a meticulously prepared report. "From the moment Uncle Wyatt came to stay, I noticed him doing strange things," he said. "He'd stay up late, sitting at the computer in the living room, typing for hours. Once I saw him try to open the safe, but he stopped when he heard you coming downstairs, Dad. I thought he was just curious at first, but then he started asking me about the security cameras, the Wi-Fi password, even how you manage the bank accounts." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I remembered the moments Wyatt had casually asked me about the security system or how I stored passwords, but I'd brushed it off, thinking he was just making conversation. "Why didn't you say anything, Luke?" I asked, my voice almost pleading. "If you were suspicious, why didn't you tell us so we could handle it?" Luke looked at me, his gaze making me feel like I was the one being interrogated. "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me right away, Dad," he said. "You always protect Uncle Wyatt. I didn't want you to think I was imagining things or causing trouble. I needed proof." He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, a habit I'd never noticed in him before. "And I got it," he continued, his voice unwavering. "I started watching him. I installed a small program on the living room computer to record his actions. I also set up a hidden camera. Not yours, but one I installed myself, tucked behind the bookshelf. I knew Uncle Wyatt wouldn't notice." My jaw dropped, unable to believe what I was hearing. Luke, the boy who still played with drones and watched sci-fi movies, had set up his own surveillance system? "Where did you learn this stuff?" I asked, my voice faltering with shock. Luke shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Online, Dad. There are tons of tutorials. I just had to find the right ones," he went on, as if explaining a simple math problem. "I saw Uncle Wyatt trying to access your bank account. I didn't know the password, but I knew how to change it through the backup email. I changed it before we left for the trip to make sure he couldn't take anything beyond what was in the safe." Nicole gripped my hand tightly, her nails digging into my skin, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt a mix of astonishment and fear. "I knew their plan before we left," Luke said, closing the laptop. "But I didn't want to make a big deal right away. I wanted them to act so I could have clear evidence. I didn't want you and Mom to think I was bad-mouthing Uncle Wyatt without reason." He looked at me, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I know you love him, Dad, but I couldn't let him hurt our family." I sat there, speechless. Nicole pulled Luke into a hug, tears streaming down her face again, but this time out of gratitude mixed with worry. You protected us," she whispered, her voice choked. "But Luke, you're only 13. Why did you do all this alone?" Luke gave a faint smile, a smile that didn't belong to a child. "Because I knew you and Dad wouldn't," he said. "Someone had to." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked at Luke, searching for the carefree boy who used to run after me in the park, laughing loudly as I taught him to fly a kite. But that boy seemed to have vanished, replaced by a young man with a terrifying maturity, someone who had seen through betrayal and acted without needing me or Nicole. I was both proud and afraid, as if standing before a stranger in the form of my son. "Luke," I finally said, my voice trembling, "you did the right thing. But I want you to promise me from now on, if something's wrong, tell us. Okay?" He looked at me, his gaze softening slightly, but there was still an unyielding resolve I couldn't shake. "I'll try, Dad," he said, but I knew it wasn't a real promise. Luke had gone too far, and I wasn't sure if I could pull him back. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Nicole held Luke tighter, as if afraid he might disappear. I looked at the laptop on the table, which held the truth about my brother, and realized that our small family had changed forever. Wyatt had taken our money and heirlooms, but Luke, the boy I thought I knew so well, had taken something else. The innocence I once believed he still had. "Dad," Luke said, breaking the silence, "what are we going to do about Uncle Wyatt?" I looked at him, seeing not just a child asking for his parents' guidance, but someone ready to act. And in that moment, I knew the next decision didn't rest solely with me. It rested with the boy sitting before me. Nicole sat beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly, her eyes red but filled with determination. "Maverick, we have to do something," she whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. "Wyatt can't get away with this." I nodded, but my heart was heavy. I wanted justice, wanted Wyatt to pay, but a part of me was torn by memories of the little brother who used to run after me in our parents' backyard, his smile radiant. And more than that, I feared that our next move would sever the last thread connecting me to my extended family. I decided to go to my parents' house, Stanley and Janet Brooks, to share everything. I hoped they would understand, would stand by me even just this once. Luke wanted to come along, and I agreed, thinking his presence would help me stay calm. When we arrived, my mother's small garden full of flowers was as vibrant as ever, but the atmosphere inside was heavy, as if the house knew what was coming. Mom was in the kitchen, the smell of cookies wafting through, while Dad sat in his armchair, a newspaper open in his hands. They greeted us with smiles, but those smiles quickly faded as I began to speak. "Wyatt stole the money and jewelry from our safe," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About $200,000, including Grandma's wedding ring. Luke found out, and we have proof, videos, recordings, everything. Wyatt and Abby planned it all." I paused, looking into my parents' eyes, waiting for some empathy, some anger at Wyatt's actions. Silence. A heavy silence, as if the air in the room had suddenly solidified. Mom set down the plate she was holding, her face paling. "Maverick, what are you saying? That can't be true." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with refusal to believe. Dad lowered his newspaper, his gaze cold and piercing. "Are you sure? This is serious. You're accusing your own brother." I felt the blood rush to my head, but I held back. "I'm sure, Dad. I have video of Wyatt opening the safe, taking the money, taking Grandma's ring. I have a recording of him plotting with Abby to run away. Luke captured it all." I emphasized each word, hoping they'd grasp the gravity of the situation. But instead of support, Mom burst into tears, covering her face. "Wyatt was just being impulsive. He couldn't have meant it. You're his brother. You have to help him." Her words felt like a slap. I stood there, frozen, feeling betrayed a second time, not by Wyatt, but by the parents who raised me. "Help him?" I repeated, my voice louder than I intended. "Mom, Wyatt planned to rob me, to rob my family." "He wasn't impulsive. He calculated everything. Do you know what Luke had to do to protect us? A 13-year-old, Mom!" I was almost shouting, but Mom just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You're tearing this family apart. Wyatt is your brother. You can't send him to jail. Talk to him, sort it out within the family. Don't involve the police." I looked at her, my heart breaking. Luke, who had been sitting silently on the sofa, suddenly looked up. His brown eyes gleamed with a determination that startled me. "Grandma, Grandpa," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Uncle Wyatt didn't just take the money. He betrayed Dad, betrayed me and Mom. If we don't do anything, he'll keep doing it. I don't want Dad to suffer anymore." His words were sharp, unwavering, like a verdict delivered by an adult. Mom stared at Luke, her eyes wide, then turned to me as if asking whether I had taught him to say those things. But I just shook my head, as stunned by my son's resolve as she was. The conversation grew more tense. Dad stood up, stepping closer to me, his voice low but cold. "Maverick, if you go to the police, you'll ruin this family's reputation. Wyatt is your flesh and blood, don't forget that." I wanted to scream, to recount all the times I'd cleaned up Wyatt's messes, all the times I was scolded for mistakes that weren't mine. But I just stood there, silent, feeling like an abandoned child once again, "I'll think about it," I said, my voice hoarse, then took Luke's hand and left. He didn't say anything, but his eyes, sharp and resolute, seemed to say he wouldn't let me back down. Back home, I felt exhausted, as if I'd just run through a storm. Nicole was waiting in the living room, her eyes full of worry. "What did they say?" she asked. I recounted everything, every word from my parents, every shake of their heads. Nicole gripped my hand tightly, her voice firm. "Maverick, we can't let Wyatt get away with this. He stole our money. I don't care what your parents think. I want justice." I looked at her, seeing the anger in her eyes, but I couldn't respond right away. The pressure from my parents, the memories of all the years I'd carried Wyatt's burdens made me hesitate. "The bank account is still safe thanks to Luke," I said, trying to soothe her. "We only lost $200,000 from the safe and some jewelry. Maybe we should talk to Wyatt first." Nicole shook her head, her eyes flashing with disappointment. "Maverick, are you still protecting him after everything he's done?" Her voice rose, and I felt the distance between us widen. Luke, sitting in the corner of the room, looked up at us. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Uncle Wyatt won't stop. If we don't act, he'll do it again. I don't want that." His words sliced through the air, and I saw Nicole nod, though her eyes were still filled with unease. The days that followed were heavy with an atmosphere like a suppressed storm. Nicole and I barely spoke, each of us lost in our own thoughts. She wanted to call the police, wanted Wyatt to pay for his betrayal, but I hesitated, torn by my mother's plea. "Don't make a big deal out of this, Maverick." I knew she was wrong, knew that Wyatt didn't deserve forgiveness, but the frayed ties of family still bound me. Every time I looked at Nicole, I saw disappointment in her eyes, and every time I looked at Luke, I saw a resolve that made me both proud and afraid. I tried to keep everything under control, as I always did with work. I checked the bank accounts. They were still safe, thanks to Luke. But the $200,000 and the jewelry in the safe, including my grandmother's wedding ring, were a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I called Wyatt, hoping he'd show up, apologize, and return what he'd taken. But the phone just rang, then went to voicemail, a reminder that Wyatt had chosen his own path. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk trying to focus on financial reports but with a blank mind, I heard a knock at the door. I looked up and saw Nicole standing there, her face tense. "Maverick, you need to talk to Luke." I just saw him doing something on his laptop. "I'm not sure, but I'm worried." I stood up, my heart racing. "Doing what?" Nicole shook her head, her eyes filled with unease. "I don't know. But he's not the same kid anymore, don't you see? He's too calm, too calculated." I hurried to Luke's room, knocking before opening the door. He was sitting on his bed, laptop on his lap, earbuds in. When he saw me, he took them out and gave a faint smile. "Dad, what's up?" I sat down beside him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Luke, your mom's worried. So am I. What are you doing? Is there something you want to tell me?" He looked at me, his gaze sharp but not hostile. "I don't want you and Mom to worry," he said evenly. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Before I could ask more, the doorbell rang. I flinched, glancing at the clock, nearly 5 p.m., not a usual time for visitors. I went downstairs, Nicole following, and when I opened the door, I saw 2 police officers standing there, a middle-aged man and a younger woman, both with stern expressions. "Mr. Maverick Brooks?" the man asked. I nodded, feeling the floor beneath me tremble. "We received a tip about a theft at your residence with substantial evidence involving Wyatt Brooks and someone named Abby. We need your confirmation." I stood frozen, my mind reeling. A tip? Who? Who sent it? But as soon as I asked, I knew the answer. I turned and saw Luke standing on the stairs holding his laptop, his face calm as if he'd anticipated this moment. "I did it, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "I sent the video, the screenshots, and the audio recording to the police. I also wrote a summary report so they'd know exactly what Uncle Wyatt and Abby did." Nicole gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Luke." You, she whispered, her voice breaking. I looked at him, my heart pounding with a mix of awe and panic. When did you do this? Why didn't you tell us? Luke stepped down, placed his laptop on the dining table, and opened a text file. I saw a meticulously written report clearly structured with headings: evidence of theft, actions of Wyatt Brooks and Abby, incident summary. It didn't look like the work of an 8th grader. It looked like a lawyer's case file. I did it last night, Luke said, his eyes meeting mine. I knew you were hesitating because of Grandma and Grandpa. But Dad, Uncle Wyatt won't stop. I didn't want you and Mom to live in fear anymore. I sent everything to the police through an anonymous email, but I included your names in the report so they'd know it's our house. I'm sorry for not asking first, but I had to do it. I felt like I was being pulled into a whirlwind. Luke, my son, had acted behind our backs with a decisiveness I'd never seen in anyone, let alone a 13-year-old. Nicole stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Luke, you've made me so proud, but I'm scared. You're so young, you shouldn't have to carry this alone. He let her hug him, but his gaze didn't waver. I'm fine, Mom, he said. I just want to protect our family. The male officer cleared his throat, pulling me back to reality. Mr. Brooks, we've reviewed the evidence. It's very clear. We've issued a warrant for Wyatt Brooks and Abby to assist with the investigation. We'll also need your cooperation. I nodded, but my mind was still spinning with the image of Luke sitting at his laptop, typing that report with cold precision. I looked at him, wanting to say something, thank him, scold him, or just ask why, but the words wouldn't come. Thank you, Luke. I finally whispered, my voice hoarse. He just nodded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That evening, after the police left, I sat with Nicole in the living room. She held my hand, but her eyes were filled with unease. Maverick, I'm glad justice is being served, she said, her voice trembling. But Luke, he's so composed, so decisive. A 13-year-old shouldn't be like this, should they? I didn't answer, only looked up the stairs where light still spilled from Luke's room. He hadn't asked for permission or waited for us to decide. He acted like an adult, like someone used to facing the darkness alone. I stood up, walked to Luke's room, and knocked lightly. He looked up, his gaze calm but piercing. Dad, what's up? He asked. I sat down beside him, searching for words. Luke, you did something huge. I'm proud, but I'm also worried. You don't have to do everything alone. Your mom and I are here for you. He looked at me, giving a faint smile that didn't reassure me. I know, Dad, he said, but sometimes I have to do what needs to be done to protect our family. Those words, simple but chilling, made my heart tighten. When I left Luke's room, closing the door with a soft click, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. He had saved our family, but at what cost? A 13-year-old boy shouldn't have that look in his eyes, shouldn't know how to set traps, write incriminating reports, or confront betrayal from his own flesh and blood. I walked down the stairs, the light from the living room casting shadows on Nicole's face as she sat curled up on the sofa, her hands clutching a cold cup of tea. Did you talk to Luke? She asked, her voice hoarse. I nodded, but I couldn't say anything more. We sat there in silence like two survivors of a storm, unsure if we had truly escaped. The days that followed unfolded quickly, like a film played on fast forward. The police acted on Luke's evidence. Wyatt and Abby were arrested at a motel a few hours' drive from the city, with the duffel bag containing the $200,000 and our family's jewelry found in the trunk of their car. During questioning, Wyatt didn't deny anything. Perhaps he knew the evidence was too damning. The video, the audio, and the computer activity Luke had meticulously documented. He was charged with theft, with the money and jewelry from the safe serving as undeniable proof. Abby, his accomplice, was also under investigation, but she quickly shifted the blame to Wyatt, claiming she had only followed his plan. I wasn't surprised. Abby always seemed like the type to run when things went south. News of the incident spread rapidly. A local newspaper published a brief article. Unemployed tech engineer arrested for stealing from brother. Wyatt's name appeared on online forums where his former colleagues gossiped about the traitor they once worked with. I read those words feeling an indescribable sadness. Wyatt had once been a talented programmer with a bright future, but now he was just a tarnished name, a stain that couldn't be erased. I thought Wyatt's arrest would bring some relief, but I was wrong. The real storm hit when I received a call from my mother. Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and pain over the phone. "Maverick, how could you do this to your brother? You've driven him into a corner." I tried to explain, to recount what Wyatt had done, but she wouldn't listen. "You're his older brother. You're supposed to protect him, not throw him in jail." My father cut in, his voice cold as ice. "You think you're right, but you've destroyed this family. From now on, you're no longer my son. Don't ever call me your father again, you hear me?" Those words cut like a knife, slicing deep into my heart. But I stayed silent, hung up, and felt like an abandoned child once again. They didn't believe that Luke, a 13-year-old boy, could have gathered the evidence on his own. "You put him up to it, didn't you?" My mother asked in another call, her voice full of accusation. I shook my head, though she couldn't see. "No, Mom. Luke did it all to protect us." But she didn't listen. They cut me off, stopped calling, and no longer invited us to family dinners like before. My parents' house, once filled with laughter and the smell of cookies, was now just a distant memory. At home, the atmosphere remained tense. Nicole, though satisfied that Wyatt had been caught, couldn't hide her guilt. "Maverick, I know we did the right thing," she said one evening as we sat in the living room. "But your family, they won't forgive us. And Luke, I'm worried about him." I nodded, feeling as though my heart was being squeezed. Luke remained calm, doing his homework, playing games, but his eyes grew colder, as if he had accepted a truth that Nicole and I were still grappling with. Our extended family was no longer a place to rely on. One morning, as I was brewing coffee, Luke walked into the kitchen, his familiar laptop tucked under his arm. "Dad," he said, his voice even but sharp. "Grandma and Grandpa chose to side with Uncle Wyatt. They're wrong. If they don't stand with us, they're not family anymore." Those words, cold and ruthless, sent a shiver down my spine. "Luke," I said, setting my coffee down, "don't say that. They're still your grandparents." He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "They may be my grandparents, but they didn't protect you. I will." That statement cut like a blade, and I didn't know how to respond. Every night, as I watched Luke sit at his desk writing in his journal or typing something on his laptop, I felt a vague sense of fear. He had protected us, but how? With calculation, with coldness, with a heart that had learned to doubt before trusting. I wondered if he still remembered how to laugh carefree, to run around in the yard, or if he had traded it all to become the family's protector. And I feared that one day, that coldness would steal what remained of his childhood. I stood silently in the kitchen, looking out the window where the faint moonlight illuminated the backyard. The storm had passed, but what it left behind wasn't peace. It was the cracks in my heart, in my family, and in my son. I wanted to hug Luke, to tell him that I'd do anything to keep him from growing up too fast. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could. The days after Wyatt's arrest felt like walking a tightrope, suspended between relief and an unrelenting pain. Nicole tried to keep things normal. She cooked Luke's favorite dinners, took him to soccer on weekends, but her eyes always carried an unspoken worry. We didn't talk much about Wyatt, my parents, or what Luke had done. But every time I looked at him, seeing him sitting in front of his laptop with that cold focus, I felt an invisible distance growing between us. He was still my son, but he was no longer the child who used to chase after me, asking about the stars or laughing loudly as I pushed him on the swing. Instead, he was becoming someone else. Strong, sharp, and at times, frightening. I decided to visit Wyatt in jail, though my heart was torn between anger and sorrow. I needed to look him in the eye to understand why he had betrayed our family. Nicole didn't want me to go. "You don't owe him anything, Maverick," she said, her voice bitter. But I shook my head, unable to explain that I wasn't going for Wyatt's sake, but for my own, to face the storm that had shattered everything I once believed in. The jail was cold, with gray walls and the clang of metal echoing every time a door opened. Wyatt sat behind a glass partition, looking thinner, his once bright brown eyes now dull and weary. When he saw me, he gave a faint smirk, but it lacked life. "You here to gloat?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I shook my head, trying to keep my tone steady. "No, I just want to know why. Why did you do this to me, to Luke, to Nicole?" Wyatt bowed his head, his hands clenching tightly on the table. "I don't know, man. I needed the money. I thought you wouldn't care, that you had enough to not notice." His words cut like a knife, but they didn't surprise me. Wyatt had always lived with the belief that everything would be forgiven, that I'd always be the older brother cleaning up his messes. But then he looked up, his eyes suddenly trembling. "Maverick, you know, that kid, Luke, he's not normal. He sent me a letter. Reading it gave me chills." I frowned, my heart racing. "A letter? Luke sent you a letter?" Wyatt nodded, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket and sliding it through the slot in the glass. My hands trembled as I opened it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Luke's neat, meticulous script written with absolute focus. I read, and each word hit me like a hammer to the chest. "Uncle Wyatt, you betrayed our family. Prison is the only place for you, because out here you only hurt the people who love you. But remember this: forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. If you ever dare come back to harm my parents, I'll be the one to end it. You tied the noose around your own neck. I just made sure it tightened." I read it over and over, my heart ice cold. These weren't the words of a 13-year-old. This was a verdict written in a childish hand, but with the sharp, cold logic of an adult. I looked at Wyatt, seeing him tremble, his eyes filled with fear. Man, that kid, he's like a judge. I don't know where he learned this stuff, but he's not normal, Maverick. Wyatt's words sparked anger in me, but deep down I knew he was right. Luke wasn't normal, not in a negative way, but in a way that made me both proud and terrified. I left the jail, Luke's letter heavy in my pocket like a stone. On the drive home, I rode in silence, my mind swirling with questions. When had Luke written this letter? Why didn't he tell me? And most importantly, where had he learned such coldness? I thought back to the nights he spent at his laptop, the screen's glow illuminating his young but determined face. I had assumed he was doing homework or playing games, but now I realized he was doing much more, building a fortress to protect us, but also imprisoning himself. When I got home, I found Luke sitting at the dining table, writing in his notebook. Nicole was in the kitchen preparing dinner, but her eyes were anxious when she saw me. "How did it go, honey?" she asked. I didn't answer right away, just pulled out the letter and placed it on the table in front of her. "Luke sent this to Wyatt," I said, my voice hoarse. Nicole read it, and I saw her face pale, her hands trembling as she folded the paper back up. He wrote this?" she whispered, her eyes darting toward Luke. He looked up as if sensing our gazes and gave a faint smile. "Mom, Dad, is there something you want to talk about?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I sat down across from him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Luke, you sent this letter to Uncle Wyatt. Why didn't you tell us?" He tilted his head as if weighing his response. "I wanted him to understand, Dad. To know he can't hurt us anymore. I didn't want you and Mom to worry more, so I handled it myself." His words, simple but chilling, sent a shiver through me. Nicole gripped my hand under the table, her nails digging into my skin, but I didn't feel the pain. "Luke," she said, her voice choked, "you didn't have to do that. We're here to protect you, not the other way around." Luke looked at her, then at me, his gaze unwavering. "I know, Mom, but I don't want you and Dad to hurt anymore. I can help, and I did." He stood up, picked up his notebook, and walked to his room, leaving Nicole and me in a suffocating silence. I watched his small but resolute figure disappear, feeling a vague dread. Luke wasn't just protecting us, he was turning himself into an adult, a warrior, and I didn't know if I could pull him back to his childhood. That night I lay beside Nicole, neither of us able to sleep. Luke's letter sat on the nightstand, a reminder of an irreversible change. "Maverick," Nicole whispered, her voice trembling. "What did we do wrong? How did Luke become like this?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. All I knew was that our boy had crossed a line, and though he had saved our family, I feared the cost was his childhood. I looked out the window where the moonlight remained faint and wondered if I could ever find Luke again. The boy who once laughed loudly in the yard, or if he had been swept away forever by this storm. Wyatt's trial was swift. Luke's evidence, videos, audio recordings, and a detailed report was too clear for him to deny. Wyatt stood before the court with his head bowed, his eyes empty, no trace left of the confident smile that once melted my mother's heart. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for theft, with the $200,000 and the jewelry from our safe serving as irrefutable evidence. Abby, his accomplice, received a lighter sentence after agreeing to cooperate with the police, but she vanished from town shortly after, like a shadow leaving no trace. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, feeling no sense of victory, only a deep sorrow. Wyatt, my little brother, had destroyed his own future, and I could do nothing to save him. My parents didn't show up at the trial. They called me once after Wyatt's sentencing, my mother's voice choked with tears over the phone. "Maverick, what have you done to this family? You put your brother in prison, and now we have nothing left." My father cut in, his voice cold as stone. "Don't call us again, Maverick. You've chosen your path." Those words were like a final cut, severing the last thread connecting me to them. They disowned me, Nicole and Luke. Family dinners, afternoons in the garden filled with flowers, now they were just memories as faint as the moonlight outside the window. Nicole was heartbroken, but she stood strong for me and Luke. "We did the right thing, Maverick," she said one evening as we sat in the living room, the soft yellow light casting shadows on the walls. Wyatt had to face the consequences, and Luke, he did it for us. But her voice trembled, and I knew she carried the same guilt I did. She hugged me, her arms gripping tightly as if afraid that letting go would mean losing each other. "We'll get through this, won't we?" she whispered. I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure. The storm had passed, but it left cracks that could never be mended. Luke, meanwhile, maintained his unsettling calm. He went to school, did his homework, played soccer with friends, but his eyes no longer held the carefree spark they once did. They were sharp, mature, as if he had seen too much for a 13-year-old to bear. I tried to pull him back, taking him fishing, watching superhero movies, but every time I asked about what had happened, he only gave a faint smile and said, "I'm fine, Dad. It's over." But I knew it wasn't. It was never truly over. One night after Nicole had gone to bed, I went to check on Luke. He was sitting at his desk writing in his notebook, the light from the desk lamp illuminating his face. I stood at the door quietly watching, my heart tightening as I saw him write with absolute focus, as if drafting another verdict. "Luke," I called softly. He looked up, his eyes glinting with a resolve that sent a shiver through me. "Dad, I'm just writing in my journal," he said, his voice even. "I want to remember everything so I never forget." I sat down beside him, searching for words. "Luke, you don't need to remember everything. You're young, you have your whole future ahead. What happened? Let Mom and Dad handle it, okay?" He looked at me, giving a faint smile that didn't reassure me. "Dad, I know you and Mom want to protect me, but I want to protect you too. If I hadn't done anything, Uncle Wyatt would have done it again. I don't want our family to get hurt anymore." His words, simple but sharp, left me unable to argue. I placed a hand on his shoulder, hoping the touch would bring him a little closer to me, even just a bit. Our story came to a close, but its echoes lingered. Wyatt in prison, my parents estranged, and our little family standing among the fragments of the past. Nicole and I tried to rebuild day by day, moment by moment, but Luke's eyes always reminded me that nothing would ever be the same. One evening, after he had gone to sleep, I stood by his bedside, looking at his peaceful face in the dim light. I wanted to believe he was still my little boy, but deep down, I knew he had become someone else. Strong, cold, and mysterious in a way I could no longer fully grasp. "Luke," I whispered, my voice choked. "I'm sorry." I left his room, closed the door, and stood in the darkness of the hallway. Outside, the moonlight remained faint, a reminder that the storm had passed, but what it left behind had changed us forever. And in my heart, a question lingered. Was Luke still my little boy, or had he become someone even I could no longer understand?